happiness is here and now. I have dropped my worries, nowhere to go, nothing to do, no longer in a hurry.
Chào mừng mọi người đến với Du Học Chữa Lành. Đây là một podcast mà mỗi tuần Hằng sẽ được trò chuyện với những người Việt Nam đang sinh sống và làm việc tại nước ngoài. Mong rằng những câu chuyện và các góc nhìn đa chiều sẽ giúp mọi người có thể hiểu thêm và tìm được sự đồng cảm về cuộc sống ở hải ngoại. Good morning everybody and thank you so much for spending time with us today and welcome Troy to the Du Học Chữa Lành podcast. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. First and foremost, perhaps you can say a few words about yourself to our audience.
Yeah, okay. Thank you Han. Xin chào mọi người. So Troy, tiếng Việt là tên Trung ha. But only like chỉ có ba mẹ thường thường nói Trung thôi. So I've used Troy all my life. So a little bit about me. Troy, our family immigrated out of Vietnam in 1995. So I've moved to America first, and then subsequently we relocated to Australia. So I sort of grew up there, had my education there, had my early career there, and then Troy đã về Việt Nam đây được là gần 4 năm in tháng 12. Yep, and I'm loving it. So I think I'll be in Vietnam for a little bit longer.
Okay, thank you. What a journey. You go all over the world and come back to where you was born. And my very first question is, what is your usual breakfast when you were in America, Australia, and now in Vietnam?
Oh, okay. Câu hỏi thú vị ha. So fun fact, Troy actually went to 6 different primary schools because I've gone to
Okay.
3 countries. So that's every year I've got a different primary school. Back when I was younger, so lúc mà mình bên Mỹ, that's cereals, like generally like Fruit Loops, Cocoa Pops. Then in Australia, I did a bit of more cereals as well, but they've got the Australian brand like Crunchy Nut, Honey. But now Troy rất là appreciate more giống như là thức ăn Việt Nam, right? Giống như là cơm tấm hay là phở in the morning. Or now I've been a little bit lazy and I usually have giống như like they call it a French breakfast, which is like a coffee and a cigarette. So that's a little bit about my eating habits.
And when you live, so if I'm not wrong, like you living in Saigon right now, right?
Yeah, so Troy đang ở Bình Thạnh in Ho Chi Minh City.
Okay. Then you go out for breakfast or you just stay at home?
I do go out sometimes, but because of sort of just work, I usually just go to work and have my coffee and cigarette at work. And then if I wake up a little bit early, then I'll have some breakfast at home. Yeah, because where I live nó không có tiện để đi, giống như like I live in a complex, so nó không có tiện để đi like ra ngoài and ăn. And I like generally like I like the street food. I used to live in D3 ở Lê Văn Sĩ when I first got here. That was awesome because in the morning đi bộ ra đường and just like food everywhere, bánh mì, phở, everything, right? But now I've moved into this complex and it's not as convenient, but it'll do.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, because for me, absolutely the breakfast change wherever you stay. Every country have like different culture of eating food, and I think American is only very fast and everything in the cans, and I don't like that very much.
Yeah, that's true. It's quick and go, right?
Yeah, like hustle life as American people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you took quite a long journey. Can you tell me a little bit like the reason why you wanted to return to Vietnam after so many years living abroad?
So Troy sort of lúc mà from about 18, mình regularly come back to Vietnam for holiday, giống như là mỗi năm come back to Vietnam for holiday, right? With thường với in the early days is with gia đình. And I guess it has to do with something about your heritage, right? That no, there's an instant connection that you can't, well, I can't like rationalize, but sort of it feels comfortable, and I get curious, right, about the people, about their life, their culture, what's going on. And then so trong cái quy trình like just holiday back and forth from Australia to Vietnam every year, I see the development in Vietnam like it's quite rapid. So I remember like my friend who was already here, like my best friend from Australia, he came back here for his family's business much early on, and like about 5 6 years ago, he's like, "Oh, hey man, that's like gonna be the biggest residential development in Vietnam," and he's pointing to where I'm staying now, right? And it
Okay.
just got built so quick, as opposed to let's say Australian speed and culture, where it's a little bit more, like relaxed. You take
Mm-hmm.
about 2 3 years to get a like development permit, and then thêm 3 4 năm nữa để build một cái dự án lớn. So I think I enjoy the speed, and that again it's that sort of hustle of Vietnam. So that's, and of course the weather is amazing. The food is right on my palate. So can't complain. And I guess what I found was giống như là cái living standard of Vietnam really has gone up,
Mm-hmm.
quite drastically as well, right? It's not like what giống như là ba mẹ của Troy nghĩ là because they don't, they keep their arm's length from Vietnam, and they have like an old mentality towards
Mm-hmm.
it. But for me, I see it. Obviously, it's not, not everyone benefits from it, and we understand there's certain level of inequalities. But yeah, but in general, the population, as we become more technologically and economically advanced, I can see that the especially the younger generation who sort of live and work here in the city, they quite enjoy themselves. So I found that to be, yeah, just all of these factors not combined together to make Vietnam quite interesting for me.
Yeah, I also think like, we have rapidly changed in the last couple of years. And I also a little bit afraid when I'm come back for visiting my family. People tell me like maybe I'm gonna be like culture shock again about my own country because everything I developed so fast. And I see like
Mm.
people they are always on the way to here and there. Everybody have like multiple jobs. They don't have only one. They have the job in the evening, the job in the weekend. They can be like influencer and so many different other things. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think it would be very very interesting. And living in Vietnam as a Vietnamese look but not speak Vietnamese fluently, is there anything like make you feel difficult?
Oh yeah, definitely. Especially at the start, lúc mà mới về Việt Nam, like even my Vietnamese now is so much better than when I first came back, right? Giống như lúc mà Troy mới về Việt Nam, just like they gave me like looks like you look Vietnamese, but how come you can't? Right? But the language shock was not as bad. I mean, because like trong thành phố Hồ Chí Minh, it's sort of where I was born as well. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not like, but I do have a big shock when I go to like Da Nang, like the middle, or Hanoi. I struggle to really understand the Vietnamese there, especially mấy bạn nói lóng, mình nói nhanh. Um, now it's getting a lot better. Yeah, definitely it's getting a lot better. And when I get a chance, the nature of my work though, I don't really speak too much Vietnamese. So, but when I go out, order food and stuff like that, I get to practice. Yeah.
And beside the language, is there anything that the Vietnamese people give you like a struggling time?
Um, very interesting question. How do I say this? So it's actually not. I think it's more of a cái khác biệt từ văn hóa and
Mm.
môi trường, right? So what I mean by that is, you know, firstly, when we talk about, like, let's say Moju, you're, in Vietnam, in the city here, everyone is crammed into a small area, right? And you can see it in, like, the transportation. Everyone just sort of have to push their way through, which is
Mm.
very different than, let's say, the environment I grew up in Australia, where, there's a lot of open space. Everyone sort of gives each other space and things like that. So that was definitely a bit of a culture shock in the beginning. Um, and then the other one is like, Việt Nam, I think it's a little bit more nosy, like always you mean like see what you're up to and always staring. Which to be honest, like in the beginning it was a little bit uncomfortable, but I develop an understanding and an empathy, like, it's not malicious, it's not, anything bad, it's just that's the nature of our people, and I consider myself like Vietnamese as well. So now I don't really have an issue with it. It's just, this is the way of life here, and there's nothing wrong with it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, people live in Vietnam is a little bit difficult to have their own privacy.
Yeah.
And I think that is so different with like Western country. And I can see by the behavior of how people use Facebook or social media in general,
Mm.
Vietnamese people. This, I don't want to use the word show off, but I see very often what they show on their social media, and I don't know how many percent of them are real and how many percent of their life they can give to their loved one.
Yeah.
And I also think it's just because of the collectivism culture from Asia for so many years, and we cannot change that. We not only have our life, we have other lives within. So it's
Yeah.
very, very hard to to really go to what you want and fight for it. I think it's not that difficult. Sorry, it's not that easy for
Yeah,
you to
you're,
do.
you're right, because that's, that collectivism and living within like a community where face is very important. And in a sense, I do hope things will get better as, let's say, at a macro level, the country and the people become more, let's say, wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly, I think history shows that through that growing pain, people will live their life in the judgment of what they perceive that other people think. Right. Until as sort of as a culture where you're quite wealthy, then you're more content and then okay to live your own life. Like, that was one of the things that the West had to, go through back decades ago, and they got into a position where they, no longer need to sort of live their life. I mean, actually, they still do now. The younger generation now, right? They live through Instagram and TikTok, and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah. So I don't think it's actually a pure Vietnamese thing. I think it's just people changes and culture changes, right?
Yeah, but I also think it's kind of like trendy because
Mm.
Vietnamese. I don't want to sound mean, but I feel like Vietnamese people. Have you know the word "sinh ngoại"?
Xin ngoại, no.
Yeah,
First time.
it's mean like it's very, very popular in Vietnam. So the meaning of that, it doesn't matter what is the products as long as it's come from overseas. So people prefer
Mm.
to buy it because
Yeah.
they believe that what is produced inside Vietnam is not good enough. So they always
Yeah.
try to have from Germany, from America, from Australia, especially if I mean even with milk.
Yeah.
Australia milk there is very popular. That's why the word is, you know, every Vietnamese people pretend to have that things, and I mean, like, it's not healthy for the domestic economies.
Yeah, that's very true, and it's not like, they're wrong in that, because certainly that's the case. But I think the gap there in quality is closing, right?
Hmm.
So if that was certainly the case, that was true back in the 90s, when production quality was very low in Vietnam. So obviously Western produce would be of a superior quality, but I think that's changing. And I
Mm.
think there's big Vietnamese brands now who are positioning themselves in the market and slowly winning over that consumer trust. But still, that's
Yeah,
still a long road ahead
yeah,
for Vietnam to compete in a global stage.
yeah, definitely. And I'm just curious, up until which age you start living by yourself?
So I my story, I was a little bit of a rebel. So
What
18
what
tuổi.
does it mean?
Rebel là giống như là chống đối phụ huynh or like
Ah,
quậy.
okay.
Yeah. Right. So I didn't take school in high school too seriously, especially towards the end. Sort of, my mom calls it Eli, like, oh, you can do
Yeah.
it. So I took a year off after high school. So I deferred from university. And that's when I moved out. And I was already working part time before that, but I moved out when I was 18. And I lived with a bunch of like roommates and all that in Paran in Melbourne. That was for like a good 6 months, and at that time I was working as door to door sales,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it was very interesting. It's just like you make money and then you go out and you go clubbing and you party and you don't really like, you just live the very short vision sort of side. But then eventually I moved back home in my 20s when I
Mm-hmm.
sort of changed my career. And then at about 26, I bought my own house with my partner. So we moved in there. We lived in there for about 4 years until we sold that and moved back here in Vietnam.
Okay. Interesting that you moved back with your parents.
My partner, not my parents.
Okay, okay. No, but you said like you move out when you kind of start have your gap year, and then you move back, and then you also bought a house, with your partner. But because I think that normally when you as original or like was born and raised in Vietnam, when you move out of your family or you even live in another country, you have kind of you're sort of homesick, and you want to go back with your parent just to visit. I mean, it's just for the visit. Do you have that feelings at all, or you just enjoy your life?
No, I miss the home cooked food and the free laundry. If I'm totally honest. And of course, not having to pay rent help us save the deposit for the house and things like that. So moving back to my with my parents sort of was like it was like a smart move, like a more mature move. But I
Mm,
only lived with them for like about 3 4 years in my 20s, and then then we bought our own place and we moved out. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So I think it's also kind of independence, because normally in Vietnam that parents, I think nowadays it changed, but I still could see they think about they want to protect their child. They don't want they live outside of their area, or even even they in another city. They try to see, okay, who are their friend who live nearby, so, can watch out my child when something happens. So I feel like it's very very different between like the culture.
Yeah.
Think, what did your parents say when you moved back to Vietnam?
They was not a fan of it, typical of what Vietnamese parents do, especially, given their life that they live through the war and then post the war, they have a different image of Vietnam, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
dangerous, scary place. It's it's sort of like they make you feel guilty, like I sacrificed all of this.
Mm.
We moved over to Australia for you to have this life, and now you're moving. So there was a bit of that guilt trip in the beginning. But I've always been very single-minded. Like, I've always been very sort of stubborn in a way where, if this is what my decision is, this is what my decision is. So I guess over time, they learn to respect that, and they learn to be okay as I've started to do I guess relatively well for myself here in Vietnam. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, so I think it's very good, and I totally understand like the parent thought. I have to left my country to come here. Now why you come back? Because I see all the black side of Vietnam, and now you come back. Maybe you're gonna follow my path or what?
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because they warned about Vietnam, but now I see my mom like fully being Vietnamese on Facebook groups and getting like dragged
Yeah, yeah,
into
yeah.
shopping codes and meditation codes, and I'm like, Mom, you're being more Vietnamese than I am. Don't get scammed.
Yeah, I think it's just, sometimes I thought that, the body is in another country, but the mind's still stuck with their original hometown, I would say, because I see that very, very often, even in Germany. Like, we have a big Vietnamese community here. And when you go to the community, you don't feel like you live in Germany. No. People speak the language, people treat each
Yeah,
other the same way in Vietnam. Sometimes it's quite bad and mean to each other. I don't
yeah,
like that. But I think that it's just stuck there. It's only, you know, on paper they live in another country, but their mind is not open to the new
yeah.
culture.
Yeah. That was also definitely true for me as well. I lived in a Vietnamese community, Springvale in Melbourne, where it's just like all Vietnamese, and
Mm.
there's a thing about face, like you said, and they were trying to show off, and it's a bit unfortunate, but what can you do? It's out of your hand, right?
Mm. And I kind of want to consider to ask, okay, when you consider yourself as part of you is Australian, part of you is American, and part of you also Vietnamese, what is the percentage of each aspect?
I get this question actually quite a fair bit. For me, I look at myself. I look at myself in layers, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so, like for example, when it comes to things like business, um, I'm very sort of Western in my thinking and my process. So like that's like 80-90% Western, like Australian or American, right? But then when it comes to my personal life or enjoyment, then I would say I'm becoming more and more Vietnamese. I like to go to coffee shop and sit there for a while and just people watch, or enjoy the food. And my partner, she has a big family here in Vietnam, so she spends like
Mm.
she get us into having a lot of time around her family and big family gathering. And I was sort of that's quite a shock to me because my family don't really spend time together like that. But now I sort of being away from home, being away from my parents, and my extended family, I sort of try appreciate it more. That, oh, you actually just gather on a Friday night, do some lao, do some noon, have some beers, talk, chit chat. Um, so I see I don't have like a fixed percentage that I look at myself. I think it's much more like situational. And
But I think, it's very, I kind of say it's very open minded. And sometimes you can be a global citizen, and you have everything a little bit in yourself. And every single time you try to like take it out, okay, now I want to be Australian, now I want to be American, and now I want to be Vietnamese, right?
yes,
You have to choose, you have a choice on that. And I think it's very, very good when you have the diversity inside you.
yeah, and I definitely do use it to my advantage as well in situations where you can't let the American have all the fun, right? So,
Why
so
not?
yeah, so if the situation calls and it's in my benefit to be more Western, then I'll certainly be that. So yeah, that's right. Like I'm a bit of a chameleon, and I guess I appreciate and fortunate that I have a bit of that global exposure. Yeah.
Hmm. And because you said part of you is Vietnamese, but I kind of think Vietnamese people, not everybody, but I see like the number of people, they kind of compare themselves with other people around them. Do you have that a little bit?
Yeah, no, so I don't have that. Um, Because I've already had a career in Australia. Like I've
Mm,
already, I did real estate for about 10 years. I had my own real estate agency. I've sold that before I come to Vietnam. So I guess I came to Vietnam when I was like 31, right? So I was sort of already quite sure about myself and my
mm.
values. So even anh đại gia here in Vietnam, you're not gonna impress me, right? The insecurities is actually in the eyes. It's not in the wealth,
Yeah, true.
right? And then that sort of extends to the way you treat yourself and the people around you. That's all of that defines your character, right? So I guess thanks to my parents that they brought me up, with uh, manners and being a generally like quite a courteous person in social situations. So I see that as more of my strength versus like I have to compete in that hierarchy the way that the Vietnamese do.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes I don't even know how can you know if the person is anh đại gia or not. I don't know how much money you should have, supposed to have in order to become a đại gia person.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, a lot of it is like you're right, right? Like a lot of it is like on loan, so that they buy big
Mm,
gold bracelets and but they've got a lot of debts. But then the really rich ones, they're actually then quite, I would say, Western in their simplicity, right? Like they won't wear much jewelry.
mm,
They're modest. So I think it's just like I think it's the same thing in the West as well. So you see like people coming up in the West and they come in to new money, their business is blowing up or they've got a great corporate job or something like that. When they're young, they'll look flashy and all of that. I don't think it's a purely Vietnamese thing to show off. Um, but then sort of as you build your wealth and you're sort of quite content and you're
mm.
there to impress other people. So I yeah, I don't see it's a absolutely like just this is the Vietnamese characteristic. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's just the label like people put on you, and sometimes they just fake it until they make it.
Yeah, I don't get how that is enjoyable to be honest. Like if you're living your life like and you're constantly like trying to show off to your friends or your neighbors or your colleagues, like isn't that tiring and exhausting? Like when do you have time for your own self and personal enjoyment? You know?
Yeah, I think so too. I think like me time it seemed to be just showing off, it's not like really they spend time with themselves. I mean, I do agree when people go to gym that they take care of themselves, but
Mm.
the end goal is just not take care of themselves. The end goal is just, showing up, okay, I have six packs, I'm very fit, I'm very lean, and I'm showing you I'm taking care of myself, but at the same time it's a little bit like struggle inside.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I see it's really interesting because I judge people by how they conduct themselves around others,
mm,
right? Especially people who are socially below them. So if you go to the gym and you're a big bulky guy, but you block people's way and you're just being an asshole,
mm,
then then you're no good. But then if you've got that strength and you've got that size, but you're courteous and you're socially more aware and empathetic, I then respect that. So I think it's not a clear one or the other because I've seen both in Vietnam as well. But you're right, like majority of them, the end goal isn't like, oh, this is me and focusing on myself. It is for the gram, right?
yes. Yeah, definitely. And you also mentioned that you have your own way of taking care of yourself. And can you share a little bit of both sides, like physical and mentally, how you do that?
Okay, so I'm not very good. First and foremost, Troy is not very good at looking after myself. I have to be. I'm sort of Eli in this aspect as well. Given like I have generally fast metabolism, I'm I look like I'm in shape, but I'm not really fit. So I'm not to say I'm good at taking care of myself. Um, I guess one of the things is like when I was young, my parents never fed me sugar, so I don't drink soft drinks. I don't eat sweets, and I know how
Uh-huh.
damaging like that is to the body. Like how like long term sugar consumption is extremely unhealthy for the body. So that's probably helped me maintain my metabolism in up until this age where usually most people would have already slowed down. But in terms of fitness, yeah, I have to do better in that. I've got a park outside here, but um, I don't know. Like I wake up and it's already like thinking about work, and it's okay, I'm gonna get stuff done. So I'm not gonna even promise to say that I'll try to do better. I think it's just in time when it comes, it comes. I'm not a big like I don't judge myself too much. So actually I find that to be a very good way for me to keep mentally health as well. I'm not too hard on myself. I have expectations of myself,
Mm.
like regarding, let's say, professionalism or work output and things like that. But I don't judge myself if I'm not waking up at 5 a.m. having cold shoulders, going for a half marathon run every morning. Like I'm not judging myself against what you see on social media. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, what you just shared is very, very interesting to me, especially like you are not judging yourself and you are not too hard for yourself. But how about your parents when you as
Oh, they
like
all,
a son
especially my
and
mom. Yeah, especially my mom. She always gives me crap. Oh, you got to eat better. You got to do more exercise. I mean, I'm used to it now. She's been doing that for all my life. It's nothing new. It used to bother me, but because of the distance, like, okay, mom, like I'm here, you're there. Like, yeah, okay, I'll go for a run. Yeah.
but yeah, but I also think like the image of a son, so you have to be successful, have to look good, you have to take care of yourself, you have to take care of your partner, you have to be responsible, you have to be brave, you have to be strong whatsoever. And it's a lot of pressures from Asian parents on a son. Have you had that pressure, and if yes, how you deal with that?
Um, I certainly felt it more when I was in Australia when I was coming up because, looking back in my 20s, I was pretty white, right? Um, Going out clubbing all the time. Any money I make, I just spend. Like it was a very short term way of living life. So looking back, then yes, of course, it makes sense for my mum to feel like, hey, you got to be more stable, you got to be more mature in your thing. But I guess essentially, um, I started a real estate agency with my brother. I've sort of set it up where it's now still operating quite effectively, and he's quite successful. I've sort of felt like I've. It's not like I had a debt to pay, but I certainly felt that my my mum had a guilt in, let's say, staying in Vietnam while she sent her son Việt being right. So
Ah, okay.
right. So like my two oldest brother, I didn't even know that I had brothers until I got to Australia. Right. So because they were being back in the early 80s before I was born. Um, because at that time, I don't know what happened. My parents doesn't talk too much about it. So there's a way where, his life got off track a little bit, and she always had a guilt, and I can see that guilt, like sort of, oh, because she wasn't there for him.
Mm.
So yeah. So anyways, I mean, it's quite personal. I don't know why I'm sharing it. Yeah. So after we've established the agency, and that's got a good business foundation, and he's runs it now, and he runs that agency. I've sort of in a way, I think that's after that. That's when my mum sort of don't really have that successful expectation of me to be like a successful son anymore, because she sort of felt like, oh,
Mm.
he can take care of himself. He's fine.
Okay,
right?
then I think like the priority had changed. That having a son and spending time with him is more important. Like how much money he makes,
Yeah,
more or
yeah.
less. Yeah, yeah. But thank you
The
for
health
sharing.
part still to this day doesn't change. Always telling me off, stop smoking, stop drinking so much, go exercise.
I mean, that is every day. I hear that. Even I'm a girl, but anyway, thank you so much for sharing me with your bit of your story. And I mean, I appreciate that. I will not dig in there because I know it's personal. But I'm just curious about when you live in the Vietnamese family, let's say, and how do you learn about taking care of your mental health? Because I know with old generation they don't do it very often. It's all they don't do it at all. They think it's just come and go. They don't even think about it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think I have the answer. I don't think I'm fully, because so much of the past is not talked about in the
Mm,
family, in my family. Like, I don't know where they tell me I was born here, but that hospital is no longer there. They told me I lived in this house when I think, but it was confiscated for expansion of the road, so it's not there. So I've lost a lot of like my initial, like when I'm born into this world, like that trace doesn't exist,
uh-huh.
right? So that's always something that I felt like I want closure on. Um, but in terms of taking care of mental health, I mean, I learned it from my parents, right? Which is you just, I mean, my mom and dad, they don't really. I'm like my dad definitely has got PTSD. He was
Mm-hmm.
in concentration camp for like 8 years. So he's definitely had his demons. Um, I think they just, like you said, they don't deal with it. They just carry on and generally like keep themselves busy, or now that they've retired they like do a lot of gardening, and so he does a lot of charity work, for example, for like veterans, like his old comrades who are still here in
Mm,
Vietnam. So he gathered funds in Australia and he comes back and he helps them buy like cows to give them like a sustainable life and things like that. And then my mum is, she's just always kept herself busy. But now, as she's gotten older, she's doing more meditation, Buddhist tours, things like that. So I guess for me, dealing with my mental health, I've sort of put that aside as well, and I keep myself busy through my work.
mm.
Yeah,
So
I don't
when you
know. I
have
don't have the solution yet.
it's okay. So when you have some down moments, or sometimes you don't feel good, or too stressed, or even close to depression, or just some down moment, what have you done during that doubt moments?
So this is, and I'm gonna say something that you guys are probably gonna laugh at because it's very Western or American of me. Which when I get my down moments, I just tell myself and try to remind myself that I'm awesome.
Ah, okay. Okay.
It's it's a very American thing, right? Like especially for like the American culture of, like, let's say African American culture of hustle. Like when I was in America, I grew up in Long Beach, California, in
Mm,
predominantly a Black and Latin American like neighborhood. And they can be poor, you can be no opportunities, but you're never looking down on yourself. You're always like, hey man, I'm awesome. I'll go get it, right? So
mm,
that mentality. So yeah, to answer your question, like when I catch them, I was like, hey, hold on, I've done a lot of cool stuff in my life that not many people have been able to do, and I just tell myself that I'm awesome, and then that sort of take care of that part at that time. I don't know
oh.
how sustainable that strategy is long term, but yeah, to answer your question, I sort of consciously make an effort to snap myself out of it by telling myself that, or like call out my best friend and like, hey man, let's go hang out. Feeling kind of shitty right now, right? So definitely, having a tight inner circle helps. Yeah.
Mm. Okay. I mean, it's very interesting that what you share about, the thing you talk to yourself that, I'm awesome. Do you believe in the words when you talk to yourself?
I I mean, like, because you've sort of developed over, like, it's not something new for me, right? That's something that I've had
Mm,
it that self confidence had been since I was like 18, when I first moved out and things like that. And I face challenges. And it's not like I come from a wealthy family, but I
mm,
made my own money. I was independent. I've lived a quite, let's say, exhaustive life in my 20s already. It's not like I've missed out on anything. So as I get older, I don't think like there's anything that I'm lying to myself about. Like, yeah, actually,
mm.
I'm pretty awesome. I'm a college dropout, but I've built a career in real estate. I'm a business owner. I'm a business owner here in Vietnam. Now I'm doing tech, like deep tech, blockchain, cybersecurity. Like, that's fucking awesome.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
it's like, I don't think I'm lying to myself. Certainly not. So yeah, I guess in that sense, as I talk about it out loud, then I would have to say I'm appreciative of the life that I've lived.
Yeah. I think it's pretty awesome what you talk to yourself, to be honest, because I mean, sometimes when people, and I also think like you don't judge yourself when you doubt. And I think it's more important because I mean, at the end of the day, you are the only person who stay with you. It doesn't matter what happens, it could be you can up and down, but and then in the night it's just you and you. And I think that is very very important, like kind of the message that you talk to yourself and you say it's okay, it's gonna be fine, but you did what you could.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Because the person that's most harsh on you is you,
Mm.
right? People think that like other people are like no one thinks about other people, right? If you think about it,
You
like
think
how
so?
yeah, no, they may be like you may have fleeting thoughts, right?
Mm,
Oh, I catch that person. Like, let's say even if you're an envious person and you look on social media and you see your friend or your neighbor successful,
mm,
it might be just that temporary moment. But everyone, at a base level, is conditioned to be selfish. Is conditioned to you have your survival mechanisms. So in reality, like no one thinks about you as much as you think they do. Like, no one
yeah.
cares, right? And if no
Yeah.
one cares, then why do you care so much about what they think about? When it comes to you. So if anything, I think that's the truth that maybe a lot of the younger generations, because the Gen Zs, they've grown up in like social media world, right? So that's a different problem. I'm empathetic of it. I don't know exactly what they're going through, but I see a lot of narcissism and self judgment going on and self hatred going on
Is being confident and overconfident, it's just very very close. And
there.
when you're young, you might not aware of it. And I mean, because the what's awesome in American is this, it can be everything. Literally, it can be everything. It can be like super good, or it can be super bad in the different situations. But the point is that I think how you talk to yourself and you believe in the words is kind of switch your moment. And I think it helps a lot. And
Yeah, it's I attribute that to the individualistic nature of the Western culture, like
mhm,
even more than the Australians. Like, I don't know if you've seen this funny clip. There was like on the news several years ago where the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, he was doing like a news piece and he was standing on some lawn, right, in their new house. And the resident just comes out and like, hey mate, can you like get off the lawn? Like, he's saying that to the to the prime minister, right? And the prime minister's like, oh yeah, fair enough, guys, let's move off the lawn. because they have a culture where it's like, I don't care like the other person is rich or not. I pay my own
Mm.
bills, right? Like I put my own lights on, I feed my own family. Like it's not, they don't really care about the society and the judgment of society as much. So that's certainly a strength that I think I've picked up from living in that culture.
Yeah, but I also think the more important, like when you say it, you even think about what have you done. It's not only about the sentence, because you told me like, okay, I already did this, I already did that. It's a fact.
Yeah.
It's not only about like sugar, what you are feeling right now, but it also like kind of reflection moment for you. So I think it's very good.
You're right, but I would say like even if you haven't done anything as a youngster, you should tell yourself that you're awesome, because who else is going to tell you that you're awesome?
Mm.
Even if you haven't done anything, right? Like you it's not about being like overconfident or arrogant, right? And then like again, I go back to like this. I think Jordan Peterson is very good in this aspect where he's like, for a man at least, it's like you need to be dangerous and then learn to manage that dangerousness. Then you can be a productive member of society. So what it means is you don't want to be meek. You don't want to be, easily shoved around. You don't, because the world will push you around,
Mm.
right? So when I was 18, like I haven't done anything, but I, unlike my friends who just, carry the path that generally the Asian family just want them to do, go to a good university, study law, doctor, accounting, all of that jazz, right? I'm like, no, I'm gonna go into the real life. I'm gonna make my own money. And before I even make my own money, I was like, hey, I'm awesome for even, being like that and wanting to challenge myself, right? Because again, no one is going to tell you what you're awesome, especially in an Asian household. My parents have never told me that I'm awesome. Right? So you can't wait around for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important. Yeah, you have to make it.
I'll tell you a funny story. So, like, I've got Vietnamese staff, right? So mấy bạn struggle with this concept of self confidence,
Hmm.
right? And every single time when it's not like I question them, I challenge them. We just have a general talk, and we're like, hey, self confidence. And I think it's a byproduct of maybe the education where, well, unless you have knowledge, you don't deserve to be confident. They have that thing where like, oh, I don't have knowledge, so therefore I'm not confident.
Mm.
I haven't been a manager, so therefore I'm not confident at leading people, right? Which I think is actually, well, then it's not about right or wrong. It's about how does that serve you.
Mm.
It actually doesn't, because you're stuck in a loop. So
Yeah.
how do you get out of that loop? Is someone else going to pull you out of that loop? No, it's actually, there's only one person, and that's you.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, totally agree with you on that point, because I think we need to see the result before we can believe in something. And I think
Yep.
that it's super dangerous, because sometimes the result might not come. Who knows what come tomorrow, right? And you
Yep.
just have to, because the other day I also interviewed another person, like she lived in America for over 20 years. And she said that whenever she has an opportunity, she just say yes first. And then she gonna figure out how to do it later. It's not
Exactly.
only about like she have everything and now she say yes. But no, just saying yes, because when you are young, you don't know what comes. Maybe you figured out your passion later on in life. It's not now.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. It goes back to that văn hóa, right? Like that culture
Mm-hmm.
in Vietnam and a lot in Asia is like, well, did you get a high grade? Did you, get into a top school? Did
Yeah.
you, right? Without the recognition of, well, you actually put in your best effort, and even before the effort, you put yourself out there to capitalize on the opportunity.
Mm.
That's the commendable part. That's the part that should be celebrated, not the because in life, like in business, in anything, like the result is not guaranteed. There's so many external factors that is not under your control.
Yeah.
You know, economy change, customers change their mind, your colleagues are being sabotaging, you've got a bad boss. There's a million factors that even if you put in the right effort and all of that, it's the result is not guaranteed.
Yeah.
So if you're going to put your confidence and judge it against like making sure all of those factors come, then the chances of you ever being in that situation is very slim and very rare.
Yeah, definitely. Look at COVID has done to the world, right? Nobody knows what happened.
Exactly.
Yeah. And my very last question would be, if you could say one thing to yourself after a journey that you back now to Vietnam, what would it be?
Like one thing to myself,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Like something that I wish I've done more. Is that what your
It
question
could
is?
be that, or it could be something else. It depends on you. Whatever you want to speak to yourself.
I think actually I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there's anything I would particularly change. I think because I'm naturally quite a so actually one thing would be slower and be more patient with people.
Mm.
That's probably something I tell myself that hey yeah I can do better there. Be a bit more patient, take it a little bit slower, don't put so much pressure on people or the situation and things like that. Yeah, that's
Have something make you have that thought? Is any
um
incidents?
yeah. I mean, it's generally like in my personal life. Like I'm a dichotomy. I look at myself as like in my personal life, I'm very patient with family and friends. In
Mm.
social setting, I'm actually quite introvert because one, I don't speak Vietnamese that fluently, so I just sort of sit there, smile, drink my beer, right? So in my personal life, but then in work in business, that western part of me kicks in, and then sometimes I may be a little bit too hard on my colleagues or my staff. Um, and it's not like I'm empathetic or not empathetic. I think I am empathetic, but it's just sort of like I don't know if I'm actually being too hard because the reality is you've they've come from a environment where let's say you work in a Vietnamese corporation and things aren't dealt with right on the spot, and because there's a lot of face saving and your manager pulls you aside like 2 weeks later and things are slow. But then when you're doing a startup and you're trying to capture market share, then it's different, right? You have to be fast. You have to be able to have honest conversation and say, hey, when things aren't working.
Yeah.
And in those situations, I'm not. I sound like I'm defending myself now, but I could be more. Yeah, I could be more like, yeah, okay, it's not as bad because I'm very particular when it comes to work things like. So sometimes I'll not chastise, but I could be quite critical, or I would make them perceive like they lose face.
Mm.
But in my defense, I say that, you know what? Would you rather me care or not say anything and not care?
It's a hard question to answer.
Right? Because if I didn't care about your success, then I wouldn't say anything. I'll just let you fail and you'll be out of here and, you know, our business move on.
Mm. Yeah.
Right. So I know, again, I'm sort of justifying myself the way that I am, but one of the things is definitely be a bit more patient, empathetic in a professional environment. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's sometimes it's just like different culture. and I
Mm,
see how European work, especially in Germany, is a very, very conservative and structured working environment. You have
yeah,
to do this, you have to do that, and when you work, you work. It's not like when you work, you on social media a little bit, you text this person, you call that
yeah,
person, but when you work, you work, and then when you're done, you can do whatever you want. But in the professional life, I think it's important to have a little bit push, because people
mm,
can go further and also get out of their comfort zone. Somebody that have to kick it off so they can develop. And I think that also, for example, like you as the manager or the boss person, I would say a leader, you have to run the business, not only about please other people.
yeah,
At some point, I think it's more important.
yeah. And I mean, you're absolutely right, but because a part of the Vietnamese culture also, like, we want to be as good as the Western, but we sort of hold it. And I'm saying we because I consider myself very more Vietnamese now as well. Like, I'm not like judging the Vietnamese
Mm,
people more, but it's like, hey, actually be objective and see why are the Germans so productive and efficient,
mm.
right? The level of economic output and productivity per capita, you can clearly see it, right? So it's like it's not like you want to copy it, but if you truly say that, hey, because there's a lot of pride in Vietnam, right? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I think that's a very um, powerful force to have Vietnam drive in its development, and will continue to drive Vietnam's development. But one of the things that I would say is, hey, let's skip the middle income trap. Let's go to hyper productivity quick.
Yeah,
You know, if you want to get a Western wage, if you want to be able to compete in the Western labor market, learn from what they do well, right? So I think, yeah, you're there. Because, yeah, there's a family culture, and I love it, by the way, because it's how they bond, like how our
mm,
Vietnamese, they bond, and therefore they are sort of loyal to the company as well. They're not just purely focusing on themselves. So it's not all like, oh, negative Vietnam work culture is
yeah,
bad. It's nothing like that. It's actually like, if we're smart about it, we should be able to take the best of different cultures
yeah,
and then use that for ourselves to our advantage.
yeah.
That's my
I
thought.
think it will be very smart, how to use people. I mean, use in the positive way. It's not,
Yeah,
yeah. And yeah, I mean, like in the professional lives, everything is different. And especially here, you don't be friend. Yeah, you do, but it's not often you be friend with your colleagues, like in
mm,
Vietnam. You don't
yeah,
hang out in the evening with them. Here you have your own things, your own business, and they do too. So I think it's very like different in the
yeah,
culture. But for the productivity, yes, I think the less you put your emotion in, the faster you can reach your goal.
yeah. Not take it personally every time, because I
Yeah.
I go back to the thing before. No one's thinking about you, so don't take it personally. You know, even if they say something mean, it's like, you're the better person. You can only control how you react. You can't control what other people say, right? And if you react emotionally, then in one aspect, you actually gave that person more power. You gave that
Mm,
person power over your own emotions, because you let
yeah.
them make you react and get angry, right? So if you want to develop that self-confidence and self-respect, then don't give that away so easily. Give that to the people that matters in your life. Give that to your best friends. Give that to your loved ones. But you can't just wear your heart on your sleeve and take everything personally in life.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a very valuable advice for, like young people who want to go further in your career path, or, even when you go to big corporations, you experience that a lot.
Yeah,
When you just too sensitive or too emotional, it's very tough for you. It's not only for the company.
yeah.
Yeah.
And last point about that, there's actually the professional benefit of that, because guess what? Your managers and their managers actually respect that more, right? Like they don't. If you have a petty manager, like, okay, if you're in like a small company, local company, but if you're in a multinational, if you're in a, an international environment, actually that ability for you to cop it on the chin, as the Australians say, just cop it on the chin and move on, that actually earns you a lot of respect in the workplace. So even if, they'll push your button, they'll try to, you know get you, but then if you don't react, they won't say it to you, but then they're like, not bad, you're different. So there's an actual benefit to it, not just being self-delusional and self-confident, for no reason.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think it's everything is just like life learned lessons. And I very appreciate your time, and I hope that our audience can also learn a lot from you, or just feel motivation after hearing our talk.
Cảm ơn Hàn, and thank you for having me here on you học something.
Chữa lành.
Chữa lành. You học chữa
Yeah.
lành, right? Yeah. Yeah. It was a great chat. I don't generally get to share my thoughts and expression like this, so thank you for having me on.
Các bạn có thể tìm thấy Du học chữa lành trên các trang mạng xã hội như Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Apple Podcast và Spotify. Mọi thắc mắc và chia sẻ xin vui lòng gửi về địa chỉ email duhocchữa lành@gmail.com. Tạm biệt và hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những số phát sóng lần sau.